Hello everyone, and welcome to my official 1v1 team building guide. Today I hope to help you improve your understanding of core synergy, adapting to face meta Pokemon, the effectiveness of lures, and the importance of consistent testing. Let's start with cores. So cores are a set of 2 or 3 Pokemon that synergize well due to typing and stat distribution. These Pokemon should cover each other's weaknesses and be able to consistently defeat the foes that give the other the most trouble. Now let's move on to some notable examples of good cores. Mega Gyarados and Magearna are 2 very strong Pokemon by themselves, but together they're even better. Mega Gyarados is a physical attacker with Water Flying into Water Dark typing, and Magearna is a special attacker with Steel Fairy typing. These 2 Pokemon are excellent at covering each other's weaknesses because Magearna is weak to Fire and Ground, which Gyarados defeats, whereas Gyarados is weak to Fairy and Fighting, which Magearna defeats. Here I've put together a little infographic to actually show you some of the meta Pokemon that Gyarados defeats that Magearna struggles with. So Pokemon like ground types such as Golem, Donphan, or Landorus, and fire types such as Charizard X and Blaziken are the biggest threats to Magearna that Gyarados is able to handle. And then on the flip side, we have all of the things, fighting types, fairy types, and normal types that beat up Gyarados that Magearna is able to come in and absolutely demolish. The second core example that I want to cover is Zygarde and Mimikyu. Zygarde Complete is a physical attacker with Dragon Ground typing, and Mimikyu is a physical attacker or a Stallmon with Fairy Ghost typing. These 2 Pokemon work very well together because if one can't break something, the other one likely can, whether it's with the Curse set or with a Groundium Z Breaker set. These Pokemon can cover each other's weaknesses too. So for example, here are a whole bunch of Steel types, normal types that beat up Mimikyu, that Zygarde is able to come in on and 1-hit or 2-hit KO with 1,000 Arrows, Ground Z, or Extreme Speed, or some combination of the above. And now we see how the symbiotic relationship works and how Mimikyu also defeats the things that beat Zygarde. So Zygarde has to worry about Fairy types and Dragon types and normal types, but Mimikyu really doesn't care about any of those, so he's able to come in on the Pokemon that expect to come in to beat Zygarde. Other core examples include, but are not limited to, a normal type and a steel type. This is a phenomenal combo for a couple of reasons. The main one being steel types are very, very good at luring in things like fire types, which normal types almost always have some way around. Either it's tanking a hit in the case of Snorlax and Chansey, or it's just outspeeding and OHKOing in the case of Porygon Z. Normal types, meanwhile, have trouble breaking through things like rocks. Well, luckily, steel types are there to make that a non-issue. Additionally, normal types often have to worry about fighting types, but the secondary typings of Mawile and Metagross, which is Fairy and Psychic, are then able to handle that. So another really strong typing is a water type plus an electric type, and this is true for a couple of reasons. The first reason being electric types are primarily weak to ground, and water is super effective against ground, so helps that one way, and then water types are always weak to electric, so we bring in something like Volt Absorb Thundurus to alleviate that electric weakness that something like Tapu Fini might have. Now, I know I said before that it's not great to double up on physical attackers or special attackers, but in the case of a 2 Pokemon core, it's okay because your third Pokemon can be of the other attacking type. So we can see cores like Mega Slowbro as a stall Pokemon and Magnezone as a special attacker work amazingly well together, and they cover each other's threats really well. And of course, Zeraora and Mega Gyarados they work phenomenally well together. Zeraora doesn't even need to run Fake Out, since it uses that to beat Sturdies, but Mega Gyarados has Mold Breaker for that. So yeah, great combos. Water and electric types, it's hard to go wrong with them. Just make sure you have something to beat grass types. 2 quintessential cores are the Fire, Water, Grass and the Dragon Fairy Steel cores. These cores are famous for a few reasons. First of all, they resist all of the things that the others are weak to. Like, you will never be super effective against 2 of these at the same time with one type. Additionally, they have really good offensive coverage. Like, they spread out what they can hit very well. There's not a whole lot of repetition. There's a little bit of repetition, like, for example, Grass and Water, they both hit ground, but there's not a whole lot of that. These are very balanced teams for the most part, and you can run a wide variety of styles. Like, you can run Hyper Offense like Darmanitan, you can run Stall like Ferrothorn, or you can run something in between like Mimikyu. Now, of these 2, I think generally Dragon Fairy Steel is easier to build around. partially because all three of those types are so dominant in the 1v1 meta, but also just because it's very, very easy to build or to pick a third Pokemon based on a 2 Pokemon Dragon Fairy or Fairy Steel core. Adapting your team to the meta. The meta is what we call the Pokemon that are strongest, most used, and most viable in 1v1. If you want to find out what the meta currently looks like, visit these resources, linked on screen and in description. Smogon 1v1 resources and viability rankings. This is going to be your source for what generally works the best in 1v1, according to the top players. The official Smogon stat page is where you can find out what people are actually using, and the rates at which they use it. Lastly, azelf.info gives very, very in-depth stats on usage and combinations of Pokemon and even particular moves. So you can see like how often Lopunny runs High Jump Kick compared to how often it runs Return or Fake Out, something like that. You want to use the available lists of meta Pokemon to find those that break your core and establish a threat list. So I've done this twice here. I've got Core A, which is Magnezone and Slowbro, and I've got Core B, which is Porygon and Mega Mawile. And I've established Threat List A, made up of Mega Heracross, Whimsicott, Jumpluff, Mega Venusaur, Aegislash, and Mega Gyarados, who all tend to beat Core A, given the right set. And Threat List B, made up of Excadrill, Sawk, Mega Aggron, Magnezone, Dragonite, Landorus T, and Mega Metagross, which all tend to defeat Core B. Now we look again at the threat list, and we choose Pokemon with a positive matchup against most, preferably all, of the threatening Pokemon. So in this example, I've got 3 fire types and a Landorus T that beat up Threat List A pretty well. Flying EMZ Lando beats up all those grass types, no problem. And then under positive matchup B versus Threat List B, I've got a few kind of stally Pokemon that tend to do the job versus those steel types and physical attackers. Now you can rotate through your positive matchups and figure out which one actually works the best with your team. Once you do this enough, you'll end up with proper, solid teams that can actually take on and defeat the bulk of the metagame. Choosing moves with a purpose. Every single move that you decide to use should have a good reason behind it. If you include a coverage move on an offensive Pokemon, make sure it actually does enough damage to KO the thing you're trying to KO. The example here is Porygon Z Shadow Ball versus Aegislash, which is actually a 3-hit KO unless you get a special defense drop. So a lot of people, they put a move like Shadow Ball on Porygon Z expecting to just hit ghosts in general, when in fact it's only going to actually work out for you 20% of the time. So even when adding stab moves, consider what Pokemon you actually expect to hit with them, and if you're not sure if a move KOs or not, plug it into Showdown's damage calculator, which is linked on screen and in the description. It's also worth mentioning that some moves, often referred to as techs, are matchup-specific attacks that let some Pokemon get around threats. Examples include Flame Charge, which is notable in Charizard versus Mimikyu or Jumpluff matchup, Rock Tomb, which is notable in Donphan or Dragonite or Heatran versus Mimikyu, Aqua Jet, which is notable in Primarina versus Megalopunny and Sturdies, Bulk Up, which is notable in Mimikyu and Gallade versus Gyarados and Charizard X, Protect, which is notable in Magnezone or Golem versus Fake Out users, and Substitute, which is notable in almost every matchup as or against a status user. The most important moves to calculate are the ones that you expect to win specific matchups with. If your Scarf Porygon Z needs to beat Gyarados, make sure it has Adaptability Uproar as its strongest 2-hit KO. If Blastoise needs to beat Magnezone or Magneton, make sure it's faster and has Fake Out and Aura Sphere. If your team has weakness to Ferrothorn or Kartana, don't forget HP Fire. Same goes for Ice coverage against Garchomp, Dragonite, and Landorus. Flyinium Z Landorus T can break Mega Venusaur and Heracross. Groundinium Z cannot. However, Ground Z Lando T can break Mega Metagross and Aegislash reliably, whereas Flyinium Z cannot. Air Balloon Electroweb Magnezone always beats Mega Gyarados, but Electrium Z or Choice Specs hits much harder against the rest of the meta. And Slack Off is more reliable recovery on Slowbro since it carries no sleep penalty, but Rest also restores a status. So are your other teammates equipped to deal with Toxic Stallers? If so, Slack Off might be the better choice. Beware of speed traps. These Pokemon, they generally have a way to immobilize you if they're faster. So try to include something on your team that is at least over 110 base speed, which outpaces Jumpluff, because otherwise they're going to outspeed you, put you to sleep or something similar, and then either like slowly boost up or kill you slowly with Leech Seed or kill you slowly with Curse or transform into you, that type of thing. Basically, there are other ways around these guys, but the easiest thing to do is to just bring a Pokemon fast enough to beat them. Choosing EVs efficiently. Optimizing EV spreads defensively is just as important as calculating the offensive capabilities of your Pokemon. Let's quickly break down defensive stat investment. Pokemon should invest in HP if they intend to tank both physical and special hits as efficiently as possible. Pokemon should not have their maximum HP if they can survive all relevant attacks with less EVs invested. Note that recovery-based Pokemon should have HP divisible by 4 to get the most healing possible from Leech Seed, Leftovers, Black Sludge, etc. Max HP is either 252 or 248 HP investment, depending on a couple of factors. You want 252 investment, or an even HP number, on Pokemon with positive effects that activate at half health, like Citrus Berry, Gluttony and a Pinch Berry, or Zygarde Complete Transformation. You want 248 investment, which is an odd HP number, on almost everything else because you may use Substitute 4 times and survive with 1 HP instead of 3 times with 25%. You won't take quite half your health in damage from moves like Nature's Madness and Super Fang, since damage is rounded down. And you can come in 4 times on Stealth Rocks as a Rock-weak Pokemon. Not really relevant to 1v1, but still worth mentioning. Pokemon should invest in defense before HP if they intend to tank hits on the physical side as efficiently as possible. This is useful for Pokemon such as Choice Scarf, Porygon Z, and Landorus, who can invest a little into defense and tank a hit from Jolly Charizard X. The only real exception to this rule, max out defense first then HP, if you're trying to tank physical hits, is extremely low HP, high defense Pokemon like Shuckle and Cloyster, who should simply invest HP to increase their effective bulk. On the topic of special defense, same thing, Pokemon should invest in SpDef before HP if they intend to take hits on the special side as efficiently as possible. This is useful for things like Mega Venusaur and Specs Megairna, who can increase their special defense above their defense, causing download users like Genesect and Porygon Z to miss their special attack boost from download. The only real exception to this rule, max out SpDef first then HP if you're trying to tank special hits, is extremely low HP, high special defense Pokemon like Deoxys Speed and Mega Gardevoir, who are better off investing HP to increase bulk. Lastly, a note on natures. So make sure to give your Pokemon a nature corresponding with its highest defensive stat if your priority is surviving hits. This is extremely important in a mixed defense Pokemon. If you're using Sableye as a mixed defender, it should usually be bold rather than calm, because its defense stat is better than its special defense stat, and the nature bonus will add more to the stat total. The exception is if you're trying to survive a particular special move that requires a plus special defense nature. If Sableye is trying to survive, for example, a Specs Hydro Cannon from Greninja, a calm nature and Metal Burst will give him the advantage in that particular matchup, where an overall more efficient defensive EV spread would not. I also want to touch briefly on speed EVs real quick, because there are some important speed benchmarks that you should know. So this is the number and what it outspeeds. So if you've got 213 speed, you'll outpace -1 speed Mimikyu. So like Heatran, for example, would use Rock Tomb, and if it's got at least 213 speed, it'll outspeed the following turn. Gyarados is super prevalent in 1v1, so 262 will outpace Adamant, 288 will outpace Jolly. 329 will outspeed base 100s like Charizard and Gardevoir. 351 will outspeed base 110s such as Jumpluff, whereas 405 will outpace base 135s like Mega Lopunny. 405 is pretty much the highest number you need to hit for most cases. The only exception is things that have already boosted their speed, so like +1 speed base 100s will max out at 492, so 493 is the speed stat that you would need to outpace them. Understanding lures. So what are lures in Pokemon 1v1? Lures are Pokemon that appear to lose to something when in fact they beat that thing. Gracium Z Solar Beam Heatran is a lure for water types and ground types. Choice Scarf Landorus is a lure for fast attackers like Porygon Z, Greninja, and Lopunny. Defensive Swords Dance Lando T is a lure for Mega Gyarados. Shuckle Berry Iron Defense Megairna is a lure for Donphan and Golem. Weakness Policy Zygarde Complete is a lure for Ice Coverage Pokemon, and Akaberry Head Smash Aegislash is an excellent lure for Charizard and other fire types. How can I use lures to my advantage? Well, if you can identify a potential weakness in your team or your core and cover it with a lure Pokemon, you can expect people to pull the Pokemon your team appears to be weak to more often. Once you understand the patterns of how people play against your team, you can consistently bait out threats and defeat them with your lure. If you come up against a lure, be very wary of it next time you face that team on ladder. Consistent testing. Test your teams. Play lots of matches on the Showdown ladder or against people you know. This is the only real way to improve your teams and tell if they're genuinely good or not. Do not change one little thing every match in an attempt to beat that last guy you faced. Do keep your team as consistent as possible, making changes only to cover major holes or weaknesses you discover while playing. The more battles you play with the same team, the more insight you will gain on how your team functions and how other players react to it. Use what you learn to update your team if necessary, or take the knowledge with you to your next team build. Practice makes perfect. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something. See you next time!